Joe's whole bad guy turned good guy facade came crashing down when he befriended a group of British socialites. One by one, they were killed off, while Joe experienced a bout of stress-induced psychosis. The murderer was dubbed the Eat the Rich Killer, and numerous people were accused of being said killer, before Joe realized it was himself all along. So much for trying to change. The season 4's finale saw Joel Goldberg weaseling his way out of trouble once again, but it unfortunately left many mysteries unsolved. The You season finale managed to cover up Joe Goldberg's murder spree once again, but the final episode still left a lot of loose ends and unanswered questions. To no one's surprise, Joe is off the hook as his wealthy girlfriend, Kate Galvin, used her connections to cover up his murders, allowing Joe to kill off his alter ego, Jonathan Moore, and return to New York as Joe Goldberg. It turns out the Eat the Rich Killer on the loose throughout You Season 4 was actually Joe, who repeatedly blacked out every time he murdered one of the affluent Londoners, starting with Kate's boyfriend, Malcolm Harding. The end of You Season 4 gave audiences an update on every character of the season who didn't end up a victim of Joe's murder spree. However, the most interesting ending is for Joe and Kate, who seem to believe their happily ever after won't get ruined by another streak of murders at the hands of Joe. One big mystery You Season 4 left unanswered is what will happen to Joe's son Henry. You Season 3 followed Joe and Love Quinn raising their son together. Despite Joe's growing intolerance for his wife, which ultimately led to her murder, he loved Henry and wanted the best for him. He planned to run off with his son, but when he faked his own murder to frame Love for a murder-suicide, he had to give up his son to his friends Dante and Lansing. In order to keep Joe's story going, every season must end with him miraculously finding his way out of trouble. After all, no one wants to watch a season of Joe sitting in prison unless he has a master escape plan. However, it doesn't always add up that no one ever turns Joe in. It seems Kate doesn't care about Joe's killer. Kate shows up at the hospital after Joe's failed suicide attempt, where he confesses to his murderous past. Like Love, Kate didn't run and try to report Joe for being a killer. In fact, she didn't even flinch when he told her. Kate used all her authority to cover up Joe's past, but the You Season 4 finale doesn't explain why Kate was so quick to accept Joe's murders. Kate had no problem covering up Reese's death as she thinks her father made Joe do it. The ending also suggests she knows Joe killed Love, but she's oddly not afraid he might kill her too. Kate's ability to accept Joe's past and mastermind a plan to clear his name raises the question: does Kate know the full extent of Joe's murderous past? The You Season 4 finale doesn't clarify this. Joe's greatest achievement is escaping consequences by lying and fleeing the scene. In You Season 2, Joe moved to Los Angeles after Beck's death. However, now that he and Kate are back in New York, will his past catch up to him? Lucky for Joe, out of all his fellow Londoners, he picked the right victim in You Season 4, framing Nadia for killing her friend Eddie after Joe found out both of them were investigating him and his murders. Joe mentions Nadia didn't attempt to defend herself and is serving prison time for a crime he committed. Nadia was so determined to prove Joe guilty that it was unusual that she would take the blame for his crimes. The finale didn't elaborate on Nadia's fate, but there are many roads the show can go down with the character. In Episode 7, Joe tortures and murders Reese in his home country, in part because Kate's father, Tom Lockwood, blackmails him into doing so. Also, crucially, Joe believes Reese is the person who's been offing his friends and trying to pin it all on Joe. But as Joe stares at Reese's bound and bloodied corpse, another Reese appears right beside him. How could that be? Well, this Reese, the murderous Reese, was all in Joe's head. It turns out Joe is responsible for all of the murders, but he can't remember committing them. He can't even remember that he's imprisoned Marianne in a glass cage instead of letting her go, because he has been disassociating all season long. Just like Lady Phoebe's stalker in Episode 6, Joe got so obsessed with Reese. Upon arriving in London, Joe developed such an obsession with Reese after reading his autobiography, A Good Man in a Cruel World, which Joe closely identifies with. Then the hallucinations start. He's really desperate to see himself as a good person, says Gamble. The Reese part, the part that just feels like he's doing what he needs to do isn't going to let go either. So that's why the Rift. We see that as the origin of the Rift, it's like Joe is holding on to this identity as the romantic hero of the story at all costs. In the end, Jolie fully embraces his dark side. After murdering Kate's father, Joe decides to end his own life because he realizes Reese is part of him. While Joe can justify saving someone like Paco by killing the young boy's abusive stepdad in Season 1, he can't justify what he's done to the women in his life. Worried that Kate will wind up like Love and Beck, Joe decides to end his life by pushing his shadow self off a bridge and jumping off too. But to his surprise, Joe survives his fall and wakes up in a hospital as a changed man, but not for the better. Joe tells Kate he's a killer, but conveniently omits that he murdered her father. Kate, who, don't forget, holds some responsibility in shady business dealings that led to kids getting cancer, forgives Joe, and they vow to keep each other honest and good. In case there's any doubt about who Joe really is now, shortly after being released from the hospital, he discovers that Nadia and her boyfriend Edward broke into his apartment and gathered evidence of his crimes. So he coldly kills Edward, framing him for Reese's murder, and frames his former protege Nadia for Edward's. While this is a terrible situation for Nadia, since no one will believe her if she accuses Joe, her fate could have been much worse. It seems that there will be Season 5, shortly after Part 2 of Season 4 launched. Netflix renewed You for a 5th and final season.